My name is Vreth-Solan, Senior Military Analyst for the Quivaar Dominion, and I want it on the official record right now, before this report goes any further, that I voted against this entire assignment. I voted against it twice, actually. The second time I wrote a formal objection and submitted it with 3 supporting documents and a personal note to my superior, Commander Oran Dak, explaining, in very polite but very clear terms, that sending me, a decorated analyst with 22 years of field intelligence experience, to observe a human military training facility was the single most insulting use of my expertise since the day Oran Dak sent me to count cargo containers on a trade dock for 6 months. Oran Dak read my objection, looked at me over the rim of his reading lens, and told me to pack for a cold climate. So, here I am. Orbital Station Pharaon 9, parked in low atmosphere above a planet the humans call Earth, specifically above a training installation they call Camp Redstone, which is located in a region of the northern continent that appears to have been specifically designed by the planet itself to be as unpleasant as physically possible. Cold, wet, the kind of gray sky that feels personal, like the weather has decided it dislikes you and is making a sustained, deliberate effort. Humans chose to build a military training camp here, on purpose. This was a decision someone made. I note this not because it surprises me, but because it fits a pattern I have been documenting for approximately 8 months now, which is this. Humans, as a species, seem to experience suffering not as something to be avoided, but as something to be organized, scheduled, given a name, and charged enrollment fees for. Let me explain what I mean. The assignment began, as most of my worst assignments begin, with a briefing that was entirely too short for how complicated the reality turned out to be. The human military is expanding its interstellar cadet program. Commander Oran Dak told me, standing at the front of a very clean room while I sat in a very uncomfortable chair. The Quivaar Dominion has been granted observer status. You will attend, watch, document, and report back on their selection process, their training methods, and their psychological profiles. We want to know who they are producing, what kind of soldiers. With respect, I said, we already know what kind of soldiers they are. We know what their soldiers look like in combat. Oran Dak said, we do not know what makes them. There is a difference. I disagreed, but I had already used up my 2 objections, so I packed for a cold climate. The Quivaar Dominion's interest in human military capacity was not new. It had been growing quietly, like a bruise that keeps spreading, ever since the incident at Keth-Oran Station 4 years ago. I was not personally present at Keth-Oran Station. I was, however, present for the debrief, and I have read the after-action reports so many times that I can recite them from memory in the original Quivaar script. A human unit, designation 3rd Combat Detachment, Frontier Division, found itself cut off from command, surrounded by a Varrock siege formation 3 times its size, in a station that was losing atmosphere, with communications jammed and no extraction window for 72 hours. The Varrock commander sent a formal message offering terms of surrender. The humans did not respond to the message. For 72 hours, they did not surrender, did not stop fighting, did not run, and did not, as far as anyone in the debrief could explain, appear to meaningfully consider any of those options. When extraction finally arrived, the Varrock siege formation was gone. The humans were still there. Most of them were injured. Several were injured in ways that our medical analysts found difficult to categorize. One of them, and I want to be precise here because I reviewed the medical file myself, had been continuing to fight with a broken arm, not a hairline fracture, a break, the kind our battlefield medicine protocols classify as combat incapacitating. He had wrapped it himself, with strips of his own uniform, and kept going. The Varrock called it insanity. The humans filed an after-action report and applied for additional ammunition funding. That is the context in which I arrived at Camp Redstone to watch human cadets train for war. The facility is, by the standards of Quivaar military installations, laughably primitive. No automated defensive grids, no thermal regulation in the outdoor training corridors, which are not corridors at all but open ground, exposed to the sky, covered in what the humans call mud, a substance that is wet dirt, and which humans seem to find neither alarming nor inconvenient, despite the fact that it is genuinely revolting. The barracks are functional but sparse. The mess hall serves food that is nutritious but that I would not describe, under any circumstances, as enjoyable. I was given a private observation room with a one-way visual panel, access to the camp's training logs, and a local liaison named Sergeant Britta Vaughn, who was a compact, precise woman in her mid-40s, with short, gray-streaked hair and the expression of someone who has been awake since before you were born and is not complaining about it. "You want coffee?" was the first thing she said to me. I did not know what coffee was at the time. I said yes because in my experience, saying yes to the first offer a host makes is good diplomacy. She handed me a cup of something dark and hot and bitter that I then spent 4 minutes trying to politely pretend I was enjoying. "It's an acquired taste," she said, watching me with what I later learned to recognize as human amusement. "Everything about your species is an acquired taste," I told her. She seemed to find this funny. I had not intended it as a joke, but I noted it down because that is also a pattern worth documenting. There were 41 cadets in the current selection cycle. I say current because this was not the beginning of the program. Several selection rounds had already occurred before my arrival. Of the original 80 cadets who had enrolled, 41 remained. The others had quit, been medically withdrawn, or been removed for performance reasons. I spent the first 2 days reviewing files. The cadets ranged in age from 19 to 28, which is young by Quivaar standards, but apparently optimal by human ones. They came from 11 different countries on the planet's surface, which meant they had 11 different cultural contexts, 11 different native languages, and a remarkable variety of reasons for being there. Some had military family backgrounds. Some had never touched a weapon before enrollment. Some were here for political reasons. Some for economic ones. A few, based on my reading of their intake interviews, appeared to be here simply because they had been told it was hard and had interpreted that as an invitation. I read every file. I made notes. I categorized. And then I came to file number 37. Cadet Okafor, age 23. Height and weight, average in the way that average means you do not particularly notice a person in a crowd. Physical fitness scores at intake, acceptable, which is the scoring category that comes after good and before needs improvement, and which I would describe as the scoring equivalent of a shrug. Academic performance, solid, with particular strength in tactical theory and notable weakness in advanced mathematics. Languages spoken 2, which is below average for this cohort. Disciplinary record, 2 minor infractions, both related to arguing with instructors, both resolved without formal consequence. His performance ranking in the cohort, across all measured categories combined, placed him at number 26 out of 41. 26th. I want you to understand what that means. Not the bottom. Not embarrassingly low. Not disqualifying. Just precisely the middle. Not good enough to be notable. Not bad enough to be notable. Just there, existing, performing, doing the thing, ranking 26th. I noted him down as unremarkable and moved on. This was, I will admit, the first mistake I made in this assignment. Day 3 at Camp Redstone was the first time I watched a live training exercise, and I want to describe it properly because the description matters. The exercise was called the Corridor, which is a name that suggests a neat organized thing and is therefore a complete lie. The Corridor is a 6-kilometer obstacle course built on rough terrain, including a river crossing, 2 climbing sections, a crawl through approximately 30 meters of the mud I mentioned earlier, a weighted carry portion where each cadet hauls a pack that is equivalent to 40% of their body weight, and a final sprint section at the end, because apparently the humans designing this felt that the first 5 kilometers were insufficiently punishing. The purpose, Sergeant Vaughn explained to me, was not to test physical fitness in isolation. The physical component was almost secondary. "It's a pressure test," she said, leaning against the observation rail beside me. "We want to see what they do when they are exhausted and miserable. Anyone can push hard when they are fresh. The question is what's left when the easy part is over." I looked at the course. "What is the easy part?" She smiled, signing up. The cadets ran it in groups of 8. I watched 4 groups. I took notes. The performance distribution was roughly what I had expected from the files. The top-ranked cadets performed well. The mid-ranked cadets performed acceptably. A few lower-ranked cadets struggled visibly. Okafor was in the 3rd group. He started in the middle of the pack, which was consistent with his file. He stayed in the middle of the pack through the river crossing, which was cold enough that 3 cadets in the previous groups had visibly gasped on contact, and 1 had slipped and gone fully under. He stayed in the middle of the pack through the first climbing section. Then came the mud crawl. I want to be clear that everyone found the mud crawl unpleasant. This is not unique to Okafor. It is cold, it is wet, it is dark in the covered sections, and it smells, and I say that as someone reviewing it on a sensor feed rather than personally experiencing it. The cadets who did it had the expressions of people experiencing something they had not been fully warned about. Most of them moved through it, quickly, because the instinct when something is unpleasant is to finish it quickly. Finn Okafor slowed down. I noticed it on the sensor feed. He was in the crawl section moving through the dark, and his pace, which had been consistent with the group, dropped. Not stopped, not paused, just noticeably slower. And then I saw why. Cadet Lena Briggs, ranked 12th in the cohort, and therefore much higher than Okafor, had gotten turned around in the dark section. Not badly, not dangerously, but she had veered left when the course went right, and she was now facing a dead end, and she did not know it yet, and the clock was running. Okafor, behind her, saw it. He said something. I did not have audio on the mud crawl section, but I watched his movement, and he clearly said something, and she turned, and he indicated the correct direction, and they both moved through, and they both finished, and they were both behind the rest of the group when they emerged. Lena Briggs clawed back significant time in the weighted carry section. She finished the exercise in 6th place overall in her group, which was a good result. Finn Okafor finished 7th. Last. I sat with this for a moment. He had seen someone in minor difficulty and slowed to help, not because anyone asked him to, not because it was scored, not because Lena Briggs was a friend, or ranked above him, or had done anything for him. He just saw a problem, stopped, helped with it, and then went back to being 26th. I moved his file from my unremarkable category to a new category I labeled, with what I now recognize as insufficient gravity, worth monitoring. Day 5 was a lecture exercise. The cadets were brought into a briefing room and given a scenario, and they were required to develop a tactical response to it, collectively, as a group. No assigned leader, no predetermined structure. They had to organize themselves, develop a plan, and present it in 90 minutes. The scenario was a hostage situation. Multiple buildings, multiple entry points, limited personnel, limited equipment, and an unknown number of hostiles with an unknown weapons profile. I watched through the observation panel. For the first 10 minutes it was, frankly, what I would have expected. Everyone had an opinion. Several people had strong opinions, and they were talking over each other, and the board at the front of the room had half-formed diagrams on it from 3 different people who had each grabbed a marker and each started drawing a different plan simultaneously. Dax Harrow, ranked 4th overall, very tall, very confident, was making a case for a direct entry approach with volume and conviction, if not necessarily with logic. Zuri Vale, ranked 9th, was counter-arguing. Ram Costa, ranked 18th, was trying to be heard and failing. It was not, let me be precise here, a disaster. It was just humans being humans in a room with a problem, which is loud and non-linear and somewhat exhausting to observe. Finn Okafor was sitting at the edge of the group with his arms folded, not trying to be heard, watching the board. At the 12-minute mark, he stood up. He did not raise his voice. He did not do anything dramatic. He walked to the board, picked up the marker that was not currently being held by anyone, drew a single circle on the board and said, loud enough to cut through the other conversation but not loudly enough to be aggressive about it, "We are arguing about the wrong building." The room did not go quiet immediately. 2 people kept talking for another few seconds, but heads turned. "The hostages are not in Building A," he continued, pointing at the main building everyone had been focusing on. "They put us in a scenario where Building A is the obvious answer. The largest structure, most defensible, most visible, exactly where you'd put hostages if you wanted the response team focusing on the wrong thing. The actual holding point is Building C, which has the only internal power connection, the only reinforced basement, and is the only structure in the scenario that has an unlisted secondary access on the eastern face." He tapped the diagram. "We send a loud, visible response to Building A. It draws attention. It draws resources on their end. It confirms their expectation that we are being obvious. Meanwhile, a 4-person element goes through the eastern access of Building C, which they will not have prioritized for defense because they will not believe we noticed it." There was a pause. Dax Harrow, who had been arguing for the last 12 minutes, looked at the board, looked at Building C, looked at the scenario sheet in his hand that he had not apparently read with the same level of attention. Harrow said. "They built the rest of the plan around Finn's observation. It was not perfect. The final presentation had gaps that the evaluating instructor identified, but the core premise was correct, and the evaluating instructor noted it in the debrief." I moved Finn Okafor from worth monitoring to a category I was starting to construct specifically for him. I called it, provisionally, "Something is happening here, and I am not sure what." On day 8, something happened that I was not prepared for. I want to be precise about the sequence of events, because it matters. The training schedule for day 8 was a night navigation exercise. Individual, no teams, Each cadet was given a starting point, a destination, a map, and no other assistance. The terrain was the eastern section of the camp's training ground, which extends into a stretch of actual wilderness, and which, at night, in the cold and the wet, is the kind of environment that makes you reconsider your life choices. I was monitoring the sensor feeds from the observation room. Sergeant Vaughn had gone to get more coffee, which she offered me every time and which I continued to accept and continued to fail at enjoying, because at some point my diplomatic instinct had locked in and I could not figure out how to reverse it. At 22:14 local time, Cadet Bram Costa, ranked 18th, who had been moving along his assigned route on the northern section of the training ground, stopped moving. I checked the feed. He was not resting. His biosensor data, which we had access to from the monitoring system, showed elevated heart rate and shallow respiration, and he was not moving, and he was not at his destination, and he was not at a scheduled rest point. He was in a depression in the terrain, a natural low point that had filled with water during the previous day's rain, and from the thermal imaging I could see that the water level around his position was higher than it should have been. He had walked into a drainage basin that had partially flooded in the dark. He was not in danger of drowning. The water was not deep enough for that, but the temperature of the water, cross-referenced with the ambient temperature and his current biosignature data, told me something that I did not find reassuring. He was already wet from the waist down. The temperature was 4 degrees above freezing, and his body heat reading was beginning to drop. In Quivaar medical protocol, this is a developing concern. In the training camp's medical protocol, as I understood it, this was the kind of situation that triggers instructor intervention within 15 minutes. But the nearest instructor was 12 minutes away by fastest available route, and Finn Okafor, whose navigation route crossed the southern edge of that same depression, was 3 minutes away. I watched the sensor feed. At 22:17, Okafor's movement pattern changed. He had been moving at a steady pace on his assigned route. He stopped. Not long, maybe 10 seconds. And then he moved off his route. He had heard something. Costa had not called out. There was nothing on the audio feed, but humans, I was learning, can apparently hear things in the dark that do not register clearly on sensor equipment. Or perhaps he had seen something. A thermal signature or a reflection, or some micro-signal that his training had told him meant trouble, and he had listened to it. He found Costa 4 minutes later. I watched the body camera data from Finn's kit. Costa was standing in the middle of the drainage basin, up to his thighs in cold water, with the expression of someone who has been too cold and too still for too long and has started to lose the sharpness of real-time decision-making. Hey, Finn said. No drama, no announcement, just hey, like he'd run into someone he knew at a market. I took the wrong line, Costa said. His voice had the flat, slightly slurred quality of someone whose body is working harder than it should to maintain temperature. I have been trying to find the bank, but the water level is different from the map. Yeah, the rain yesterday moved it, Finn said. He sounded, I noted, completely unbothered, which was either impressive composure or evidence that humans have a different relationship with crisis than other species do. I was beginning to suspect it was both. Can you walk? Yes. Good. Come left, not right. The ground firms up on the left side. He walked Costa out of the basin. He got him moving, which raises body temperature. He stayed with him for 11 minutes, which was the amount of time it took for Costa's biosignature data to return to normal range. And then, and this is the part I spent a long time thinking about afterward, he checked his own navigation map and identified a modified route that would let him complete his own objective while staying close enough to Costa's route that he could respond if Costa ran into further trouble. He finished the night navigation exercise in 31st place because of the time he had lost. He was penalized for deviating from his assigned route. He did not argue the penalty. I sat in the observation room in the dark and the quiet, and I wrote a very long note in my assignment file, and I did not for some time feel that I had the right words for what I was documenting. There is a concept in Quivaar military theory called Keth-Oran, which translates roughly as the load-bearing stone. It refers to a structural principle. In any formation, in any unit, there is always one element that is not the largest, not the most visible, not the most impressive, but around which the whole structure holds its shape. Remove the load-bearing stone and the arch falls. Most observers never identify it because it does not look important. It looks average. It looks, if you are not paying close attention, like all the other stones. I had a mentor, years ago before I became an analyst, who used to say, you can always identify the best warrior in any unit. The best warrior is not the one with the most kills. The best warrior is the one that every other member of the unit instinctively moves toward when something goes wrong. I thought about that sitting in the observation room, watching the heat signatures of 41 human cadets moving through the dark on their individual navigation routes. I thought about a cadet ranked 26th who had slowed down in the dark to redirect a colleague, who had spotted the wrong building in a tactical scenario, who had walked off his assigned route in a cold, wet night to make sure another person did not get hypothermia. None of these things were scored. None of them appeared in the performance metrics that would determine who graduated and who did not. The Quivaar Dominion's official observer report was supposed to focus on performance benchmarks, physical metrics, tactical aptitude scores. I had been here 8 days. I was already writing a supplemental report that I had not been asked to write. Day 10 was the day I started to understand that something was building. Not all of it was about Finn Okafor. Let me be fair. The cohort as a whole was performing in ways that I found, the more I watched, genuinely difficult to categorize within Quivaar military frameworks. Our frameworks assume a certain shape of soldier. Our selection processes are designed to find that shape. The humans were producing something that fit the shape only partially, and broke it in interesting ways. But there was a particular development on day 10 that I want to document carefully. The exercise was a team scenario. 4 teams of 10 cadets each. The objective was to secure a designated area, designated as Site 7, within a time window, against a simulated opposing force made up of senior cadets acting as hostiles. The rules were clear. The scoring was clear. The 4 teams were meant to operate independently, compete for the objective, and be evaluated separately. No one told them they were not allowed to communicate between teams. Finn Okafor, whose team was Team 3 and whose team had drawn what was, by any spatial analysis, the worst approach route to Site 7, spent 20 minutes of the preparation period talking to members of Teams 1 and 2. Not loudly, not obviously, just moving around the staging area, talking to people. I watched it happen and I could not in real time tell what he was doing. Then the exercise began. Team 1, who had the best approach route, made a direct push for Site 7 that was loud, fast, and fully committed. It drew every hostile to the northern face of the objective in the first 4 minutes, because it was the most visible threat. Team 2, meanwhile, hit the eastern approach at a time that was precisely 6 minutes after Team 1's push. Precisely, not approximately. The timing was intentional, and it was time to catch the hostiles mid-reorientation, which is the moment of maximum tactical vulnerability, which is a very specific piece of knowledge for a 23-year-old cadet ranked 26th to be applying. And Team 3, Okafor's team, came through the approach that had looked worst on the map but which had the single feature that mattered. It was the approach the hostiles had left completely undefended because they had allocated everything to the north and east. Team 3 secured Site 7. They secured it 22 minutes into a 40-minute window. The evaluating instructors spent 40 minutes after the exercise looking at the playback, and the conversation I was able to partially follow through the observation feed suggested that no one could formally penalize any team for anything, because no rule had been broken, but that several instructors had some very specific questions about the preparation period. Sergeant Vaughn came to find me in the observation room that evening. She brought coffee. I took it. "You have been writing a lot of notes," she said, looking at my data pad with the expression of someone who had observed observers before. "You're cadet," I said. "Number 37. She looked at me for a moment, then she nodded once, slowly, the way someone nods when they are confirming something they already knew but were waiting for someone else to arrive at. "What about him?" she said. "He is not ranked 26th. I said. She held her coffee cup with both hands and looked at the observation panel. "No," she said, "he is not." "Then why does he rank 26th? She was quiet for a moment, not evasive, thoughtful, the way humans are thoughtful when they are choosing precise words. "Because," she said finally, 26th is where he needs to be right now." I did not understand that. I wrote it down. I stared at it for a long time after she left. Day 12. Morning briefing. I want to describe this carefully. Commander Quivaar, who was my superior's representative on the station above me and who communicated with me via weekly data uplinks, sent a message that morning. It was not technically urgent, but it contained a piece of information that changed the texture of everything I had been watching. The Quivaar Dominion's observer status at Camp Redstone had not been granted purely for intelligence purposes. I had known that. What I had not fully been told, what Orandak had, I now believed deliberately, withheld from my initial briefing, was that the Dominion was considering a formal military exchange program with the human forces. a program in which selected human cadets would participate in Quivaar Joint Force operations, real operations, not simulations. And the Dominion wanted me to identify candidates. I sat with that message for a while. Then I looked at the training feed, where 41 cadets were beginning their morning physical conditioning, running a perimeter loop in the cold gray light, and I found Okafor in the pack, running in the middle, ranked 26th, unremarkable, steady, watching everything. I started a new document. I put his name at the top, and then I stopped because something on the training feed caught my attention. And caught my attention is perhaps too mild a phrase for what happened, because what happened is that the feed showed something that should not have been there. Something that the camp's automated perimeter sensors were only just beginning to register. Something that turned the quiet gray morning at Camp Redstone into something else entirely. There was a signal coming from inside the camp, not a cadet's biosensor, not a training system, something else. Something that had no business being there. I leaned forward. On the running track below, Okafor had slowed down. He had stopped, actually. In the middle of the group, everyone else flowing past him. He was looking at something, not the signal source. He could not have known about the signal. There was no way he could have known, but he was looking in the same direction. He was looking at the eastern maintenance corridor. My hand moved to the alert panel, and the day stopped being an ordinary day. My name is Vreth-Solan, senior military analyst for the Quivaar Dominion, and I want to add something to the official record before this second portion of my report proceeds. I have been a field intelligence analyst for 22 years. I have been in 4 active conflict zones, 2 contested border territories, 1 diplomatic crisis that technically never happened according to everyone involved, and a 6-month cargo counting assignment that I still have not fully forgiven. In all of that time, in every situation that tested my professional composure, I have maintained what my colleagues describe as an almost unreasonably calm exterior. This is considered one of my professional strengths. I have been commended for it. I mention this because what happened next, beginning at approximately 0642 local time on day 12 at Camp Redstone, tested that composure in ways that I had not budgeted for. Let me continue from where I stopped. The signal was wrong in several specific ways that I will now list, because I am an analyst and listing is how I process things that frighten me. First, it was using a frequency band that the camp's communication systems did not utilize. Not an adjacent band, not an overlapping one. A completely different portion of the spectrum, one that the camp's automated monitoring had not flagged immediately because it had not been told to look there. This is not a mistake a malfunctioning piece of equipment makes. This is a choice someone made about where to hide a transmission. Second, it was short. Not the shortness of a partial signal or a corrupted one. The shortness of a signal that was designed to be short, structured to convey maximum information in minimum detectable time, which is called burst transmission, and which is used by people who are trying very hard not to be found. Third, and this is the one that made my professional composure take a significant visible hit, the encoding structure of the signal was not human. I sat in the observation room for approximately 4 seconds after I confirmed this, doing nothing. This is, I believe, the correct response to discovering that someone has placed a non-human communications device inside a human military training installation. 4 seconds of doing nothing. It is respectfully the right amount of time to take before you do something. Then I hit the alert panel. The camp's automated security protocols activated, which meant that somewhere in the base a response team was mobilizing, and somewhere in the base a duty officer was being woken up to a situation that was going to ruin their morning. And somewhere in the base, the senior cadets who served as night security rotation were being redirected toward the eastern maintenance corridor. And on the running track below, Okafor had not moved. He was still standing where I had last seen him, in the middle of the running path, while his fellow cadets streamed around him in confusion at the sudden alert tone, and he was still looking at the eastern maintenance corridor, and something about the way he was standing, completely still, completely focused, in the middle of the controlled disorder of 40 other people reacting to an unexpected alarm, made me think of something Sergeant Vaughn had said to me. 26th is where he needs to be right now. I had not understood it when she said it. I was beginning to. Let me explain what the Eastern Maintenance Corridor actually was, because it matters for what happened next. The corridor was a utility access passage along the eastern perimeter of the main training facility. It connected the camp's power distribution nodes, water management systems, and communication relay points. It was not a high-traffic area. It had regular maintenance checks, but those were scheduled and logged, and the logs showed no scheduled maintenance for that morning. The corridor was also, And I noted this with a specific feeling that I am going to describe as professional unease, the corridor that had the weakest sensor coverage on the camp's perimeter grid. Not absent, not unmonitored, just the one area where the coverage had the smallest overlap between sensor zones, the narrowest window of redundancy, the most darkness between the lights. This is not an accident. Someone had looked at this installation and found its quietest place. They had found the gap in the grid. They had placed something there, and they had been doing it quietly enough that the camp's automated systems had not caught the signal until the burst transmission activated, which was either a very precise calculation of the monitoring cycle's blind spots or extremely good luck, and in my professional experience, when something looks like extremely good luck, it is almost never luck. The response team that mobilized was 12 people, 8 security personnel and 4 senior cadets on duty rotation. They were armed, equipped, and moving with the efficient speed of people who had drilled for this specific scenario. They reached the eastern maintenance corridor in 4 minutes and 20 seconds. The corridor was empty. Whatever had been there was gone. The device, when the sweep team found it 11 minutes later behind a coolant pipe junction at the corridor's midpoint, was the size of a closed human fist. Dark, inert, the burst transmission had been its one and only function. It had transmitted, and then it had shut down completely, because it had done what it was supposed to do, and it did not need to do anything else. I was staring at the sensor images of this device when Sergeant Vaughn appeared in the observation room doorway. She had clearly been asleep when the alert activated because her hair was not fully in order, which I had never seen before, and she had one of those coffee cups in her hand already, which meant either she had extraordinary reflexes or she had been expecting something like this. I could not tell which. The device, I said before she could speak. The encoding structure. That is not human technology. No, she said, it's not. She said it with a specific flatness, the kind of flatness that means something is not new information to the person saying it. I looked at her. How long, I said very carefully, has this been happening? She set the coffee cup down on the nearest surface. She looked at the sensor display showing the inert device in the maintenance corridor. She looked at me. Third incident in 8 weeks, she said. I closed my report file and opened a new one. I am going to tell you what the Quivaar Dominion officially knew and officially did not know at this stage of the assignment, because the gap between those two things is significant, and I find it somewhat personally embarrassing. The Dominion knew human military capacity was growing, human expansion into contested interstellar territories was accelerating, human diplomatic and military relationships with various other species were developing rapidly. The Dominion did not know. At least one non-human intelligence service had already assessed that the human military training program at Camp Redstone represented a specific strategic threat and had been conducting active surveillance operations inside the facility for approximately 2 months. I want to be clear about what this means. Some other intelligence service from some other species had decided that Camp Redstone was important enough to send assets to inside a human military installation on the human homeworld, at the cost and risk of getting caught. That is not casual interest. That is priority-level concern. I had been sent here to evaluate whether human cadets were worth including in a military exchange program. Someone else had already concluded that human cadets were worth monitoring, infiltrating, and possibly interfering with. I added this to my supplemental report with a note that this supplemental report had now grown significantly larger than the primary report, and that Commander Orjan Doc would probably want to sit down when he read it. The camp went into what the humans call heightened security posture, which meant, practically, that several things changed in the training schedule and several things did not. The cadets were briefed that a security incident had occurred, that it was being investigated, and that training would continue. The phrasing was careful, and the information was minimal, which is standard, and the cadets accepted it with the particular human combination of visible tension and continued function that I was starting to find less surprising and more quietly impressive. They were anxious. They kept training. This is one of those things about humans that I keep writing down and that I cannot fully explain to a Quivaar audience who has not watched it happen in person. The afternoon of Day 12 had a scheduled scenario exercise. A simulated communication breakdown. Teams had to coordinate and execute a 3-stage objective using only non-electronic signals, no radio, no data links, voice and visual only, because the scenario presumed that all electronic communication had been compromised. In the morning, the camp had found a real non-human surveillance device in its maintenance corridor. In the afternoon, they ran a drill about communication blackouts. I sat with this coincidence for a while. I thought about whether it was a coincidence. I decided it was not. Sergeant Vaughn had adjusted the afternoon exercise parameters. I wrote that down too. Finn Okafor was in Team 3 again for this exercise, which was by random assignment, but which was starting to feel to me like the kind of random assignment that keeps producing the same result, and which I was beginning to wonder was actually random. I watched the exercise from the observation room. The three-stage objective required: first, establishing a rally point under simulated hostile observation; second, securing a communications node; and third, extracting a simulated casualty under fire. The casualty was played by a training mannequin with a weight of approximately 80 kilograms, which is close to the average adult human mass and therefore not a trivial thing to move at speed. The exercise began badly for Team 3. Their designated rally point was compromised in the first 4 minutes when the senior cadet opposition force located them sooner than expected, which forced them to abort the rally and scatter into secondary positions. 2 team members were assessed as eliminated under the exercise rules in the first 7 minutes. 8 people left. 3 stages to complete. No electronics. No certainty about where the opposition was. Dax Harrow, who was also on Team 3 by that day's random assignment, took point for the initial movement toward the communications node. Harrow was good. I want to be fair. He was strong, fast, confident, and had a genuinely sharp tactical mind in direct confrontation. He moved the team efficiently, but the communications node was in a position that had 2 obvious approach routes and one that was not obvious. The non-obvious route required crossing open ground during a specific 12-second window when the opposition's observation coverage was interrupted by a terrain feature, a small ridge that broke line of sight for exactly long enough to get across. Harrow took the second obvious route, which was faster but which put the team under observation for 30 meters of movement. They lost another team member, 7 people, Finn Okafor among them. At the communications node, Harrow called the group together for a fast planning discussion about the casualty extraction. The mannequin was in a position that required someone to carry it across 200 meters of contested ground. We split, Harrow said. Half goes loud on the northern approach, draws their attention. Other half takes the mannequin south. It was not a bad plan. It was the kind of plan that a person who is thinking correctly and quickly arrives at. Finn Okafor said quietly but clearly. They will expect the split. They have seen us use it already in this exercise, north diversion twice. They are going to be covering the southern route. Harrow looked at him. You have a better option? Yes, Finn said simply. Not arrogantly, just, yes, I have a better option, as a statement of fact. He pointed at the terrain map. The mannequin does not go south, it goes straight through. Right through the center, on the most direct line, the route that has no cover and no concealment. Silence from the group. That is the worst route, someone said. That is the route they have not covered, Finn said, because no one goes that way. There is no logical reason to go that way. It is exposed, it is direct, it is the kind of thing you only do if you have no better options, or if you are very stupid. They know we are not out of options, and they have no reason to think we are stupid. So that route is empty. We go through the middle and we do it fast, and we do not stop. Another pause. Harrow looked at the map, looked at the route, looked at Finn. If you are wrong, Harrow said, we fail this exercise. Yes, Finn agreed. And if I am wrong with my plan, we also fail this exercise. Yes, Finn said. But with my plan there is a chance they have genuinely left the center empty. With your plan there is no chance they are not covering the south. I watched Harrow's face. I watched him process this. I watched him make the decision. Go, he said. They went through the center. The center was empty. They extracted the casualty in 4 minutes and 21 seconds, which was the fastest extraction time recorded by any team in that exercise cycle. And the opposition force's after-action review showed that 3 of their 7 members had been positioned specifically to cover the southern approach, anticipating exactly the split Harrow had originally proposed. The exercise evaluators scored Team 3's performance as the highest of the 4 teams. Finn Okafor received no individual performance commendation because the plan had been implemented as a team action, and the individual credit went to the team as a whole. He sat in the debrief with the same expression he always had, which was attentive, calm, and giving nothing away, and he did not argue for recognition, and he did not look at Harrow with any particular expression when Harrow received the evaluator's positive note for adaptive leadership under pressure. I sat in the observation room, and I felt something that I am going to describe, for the official record, as professional frustration. Not at Harrow, not at the evaluation system, at myself, because I was the one who had put Finn Okafor in the unremarkable category on day 1, and I was the one who was now filling supplemental pages trying to describe why he was the most important thing I had seen at this facility, and I still did not have the right framework for it. Day 15, the second signal. It came at 14:30, a different frequency this time. Same burst transmission structure, same non-human encoding. This one came from outside the perimeter, which meant that whoever had placed the first device and abandoned it was still active in the area and had simply moved their transmission point. They were not gone. They were watching. The camp's security team located the general transmission area, a stretch of tree line approximately 400 meters north of the perimeter fence, but found no physical evidence of an operator. Whoever had sent the second signal was gone before anyone arrived. I had a long, very serious conversation with Sergeant Vaughn that evening. "You need to tell me," I said, "what you believe this is, not what the security investigation says, what you believe." She was quiet for a longer time than usual. "I believe," she said slowly, "that someone outside this facility has identified that this cohort is producing something they do not want produced. I believe they are watching to understand what that is. And I believe they have not done anything active yet because they have not decided what to do about it." "What are they watching for specifically?" I asked. She looked at me with the particular expression that I had come to learn meant she was deciding how much to tell me. "You already know the answer to that," she said. I did. I just wanted to hear her say it. She did not say it, but she did refill my coffee, which had become, I now admitted to myself, something I actually looked forward to. A fact about this assignment that I planned to take to my grave. Day 17. The cohort ranking was officially updated and posted, as it was every 17 days, to reflect current cumulative performance scores. I pulled up the new ranking list before anyone else arrived at the observation room that morning. I found Finn Okafor's name. He had moved. Not to first, not to the top of the list, where the dramatic story version of this assignment would probably have placed him. He had moved from 26th to 22nd, 4 places. Quiet, incremental, barely noticeable. I stared at the list for a long time. I thought about the mud crawl on day 3, where he had slowed to redirect a colleague and finished last. I thought about the lecture room on day 5, where he had identified the right building without announcing that he was the one who identified it. I thought about the night navigation on day 8, where he had walked off his route to pull Costa out of a freezing drainage basin and accepted the penalty without complaint. I thought about Site 7, and the 3-team coordination, and the morning run when he had stood still in the middle of an alert and looked at a maintenance corridor before anyone else had reacted. 22nd. Not first. Not noticed. Not celebrated. He was moving like water moves. Not with force, not in a straight line, but always finding the level, always finding the path, always in ways that were almost impossible to trace back to him specifically, making things work. I went back to something I had written in my notes on day 12 and had not fully processed. 26th is where he needs to be right now. Now I understood it. He was not failing to rank higher, he was not being overlooked. He was not ranked 26th because the system was missing something. He was ranked where he needed to be because if he ranked higher, the nature of what he was doing would change. The team dynamics that he was quietly shaping would shift, the trust that other cadets placed in him, instinctive, unexamined, the kind of trust that makes people follow without knowing they are being led, would become something more formal and therefore something more fragile. He was staying quiet so that the real thing he was doing could keep working. I thought about the Varric siege at Keth-Oran station. I thought about the human soldier with the broken arm, who had wrapped it in strips of his own uniform and kept going. I thought about what happens when you put this, what Finn Okafor was, into a unit. Not the strongest, not the fastest, not the best fighter or the top-ranked tactical mind or the most decorated performer, just the one that every other member instinctively moves toward when something goes wrong. I wrote the longest note I had written in this assignment. It took 40 minutes. When I was done, I read it back, and I decided that Orandak needed to read it before I submitted anything else, because what I had just written was not an observer report. It was a recommendation, and the recommendation had implications that I needed my superior to understand before they became official Dominion policy. Day 19. The thing I was not expecting. I want to be honest with you about the sequence of events because I think honesty is important and also because Orandak is going to want the exact sequence when he reads this. At 03:15 local time, the camp's perimeter sensors registered movement. Not a signal this time. Physical movement in the tree line north of the facility, the same tree line that the second transmission had come from. The duty officer activated the camp's standard response, which meant perimeter team mobilization, sensor grid boost, and a stand to alert for the security rotation. Standard procedure. Measured and efficient. At toll 321, the motion sensors reported that the movement had ceased. The perimeter team swept the area. Nothing. The camp relaxed slightly. At 0334, the motion sensors registered movement again. Closer this time. Inside the outer perimeter. I was awake. I had been reviewing data when the first alert activated, and I had not gone back to sleep, because something about the first alert had felt in a way I could not fully articulate, different from the previous incidents. The previous transmissions had been observational, passive. This felt active. The response team mobilized to the new contact point. At 0341, while the response team was moving toward the sensor contact inside the perimeter, a second motion alert activated, on the opposite side of the facility, inside the perimeter wire. Not one contact, two. The camp duty officer made the correct call immediately, splitting the response team and activating the facility lockdown protocol. Barracks doors sealed. All non-essential personnel secured. 41 cadets in their bunks. Except, I checked the cadet tracker system, the biosensor network that monitored every cadet's location and vitals. 41 cadets. One of them was not in the barracks. Finn Okafor's biosensor placed him 40 meters east of the barracks block, in the open space between the main building and the eastern maintenance corridor. My hand went to the communication channel to alert the duty officer. And then I stopped, because on the facility camera feed I could see him. Finn Okafor, in the dark, standing completely still, facing the eastern maintenance corridor. And in the corridor, the infrared feed showed a shape that was not a human shape. Not a large shape, not an aggressive posture, from what I could assess. But not a human shape. Too tall, too thin in the wrong places, with a thermal signature that read cooler than the ambient temperature in a way that biological organisms from warmer star systems tend to read when they are in Earth's northern climate. I have seen many species in my 22 years. I recognized the profile. Keth-Oran, a scouting subspecies from the Meridian Collective. Cold-blooded intelligence operatives who favored surveillance roles in low-temperature environments precisely because their thermal signatures were harder to isolate against cold backgrounds. Methodical, patient, not known for direct confrontation, not dangerous, specifically, unless they had been given a direct action mandate, which was unusual but not unheard of, and they were standing 6 meters from a 23-year-old cadet who was ranked 22nd out of 41 and who had no weapon and who was wearing his sleeping clothes. I opened the communication channel. Finn Okafor spoke first. "I know you have been here before," he said. His voice on the audio feed was steady. Not the steadiness of someone who is not afraid. The steadiness of someone who is afraid and has decided that the fear is not the point. The figure in the corridor did not move. The first device in the corridor behind the coolant pipe, that was yours. The transmissions from the north tree line, also yours. A pause. I am not pointing this out to threaten you. I am pointing it out because I want you to understand that you have already been identified, and that the security team is going to reach this corridor in approximately 3 minutes. And that how the next 3 minutes go depends on what you decide to do. Silence on the feed. Then the figure moved, slightly, and said something in a language that the camp's translation system flagged as unregistered, but that I recognized as a Meridian Collective field dialect. The translation was rough but functional. "You should not be out here." "No," Finn agreed, pleasantly. "Probably not. But neither should you." Another pause. "Why have you not triggered the alarm?" the figure asked. The translation lagged slightly. "I triggered it 30 seconds ago," Finn said, "but I came out here first because I wanted to ask you something before anyone with a weapon showed up and the situation became less conversational." I sat absolutely still in the observation room. "What?" the Keth-Oran operative said, and the translation software flagged a tone marker that it classified as startled. "What are you actually looking for?" Finn said. "Not surveilling. Looking for. You have been here 3 times. You have collected transmissions. You have not taken any direct action. Whatever you came here to find, I do not think you found it yet, and I am curious what it is." The figure was quiet for 4 seconds. "You," it said. Finn was quiet in turn. "Not specifically you," the operative continued, and now the translation was coming cleaner, and I realized the operative had switched to a dialect the translation system knew better, possibly deliberately. "A type. We have been watching this facility because someone within the Dominion Observer program filed a preliminary note suggesting this cohort was producing an unusual strategic profile. We were sent to verify." I felt very specifically like someone had dropped something cold down the back of my neck. My preliminary note, my early supplemental note marked internal, filed to the Quivaar data relay 2 weeks ago, which I had assumed was secure and which had apparently traveled further than I had intended. Okafor said, "Did you find what you were looking for?" A pause. "Yes," the operative said. "And what are you going to do about it?" The security team entered the corridor from the far end at that moment, 4 people, armed, lights up, completely correct in their procedure. The Keth-Oran operative was found, secured and removed with no resistance, precisely as Keth-Oran field operatives behave when cornered, because direct confrontation is not in their profile. Okafor stood in the corridor, in his sleeping clothes, and answered the security team's questions about how he had come to be there, and his answers were accurate and clear, and included the specific detail that he had triggered the silent alarm before leaving the barracks rather than after reaching the corridor, which was true, and which I verified on the log, and which meant that he had known there was something in the eastern corridor before the perimeter sensors had registered the second contact. He had sensed it, or he had calculated it. I am still not certain which. The debrief took 3 days. The Keth-Oran operative was identified, processed, and returned to the Meridian Collective via diplomatic channel with a formal notification that was not quite a protest and not quite a warning, but was the diplomatic equivalent of a very firm look. The 2 additional contacts from that night turned out to be automated decoys, small motion-triggering devices the operative had placed earlier in the week to divide the security response, which was sophisticated tradecraft, and confirmed that the surveillance operation had been professionally planned. Commander Orandak contacted me directly on the second day of the debrief, which he had never done before in this assignment, and the call lasted 47 minutes, during which he said very little and I said a great deal. At the end of the 47 minutes, he asked me one question: is he aware of what he is? I thought about this. No, I said, I do not believe he is, but I believe he is becoming aware. Orandak made a sound that is the Quivaar equivalent of a long, slow exhale. The exchange program recommendation, he said. You are going to include him. Yes, I said. Top of the list. I thought about Okafor standing in a cold, dark corridor in his sleeping clothes, talking calmly to an intelligence operative from a species he had likely never encountered, asking the right question, the only question, in the 3 minutes he had before the situation stopped being conversational. Top of the list, I said. Day 23, the final ranking. The cohort selection cycle concluded. The evaluating board spent 2 days reviewing all performance data, all exercise scores, all medical records, all behavioral assessments, and produced a final ranked list. Okafor ranked 14th, up from 22nd, up from 26th, but still, carefully, still in the middle of the pack. Not first, not second, not close to the top. 14 out of 41. Sergeant Vaughn came to find me in the observation room one last time. She brought coffee. I took it and drank it without hesitation, and she noticed, and something in her expression shifted in a way that I have decided to interpret as approval. He is going to be assigned to the Frontier Division, she said. Field Operations, Mixed Species Unit, Rotating Command Structure. That is a significant posting for a cadet ranked 14th. It is, she agreed. Someone specific assigned him there. She looked at her coffee. The Frontier Division commander requested candidates with specific profile characteristics, she said. Adaptive reasoning, collaborative instinct, stability under novel pressure, and specifically the ability to function effectively within non-human command structures. I looked at her, and someone on the evaluation board matched those characteristics to the candidate files, she continued, and Okafor matched every single criterion, perfectly, and the board accepted the match. They did. I sat with that. I thought about profile characteristics. I thought about adaptive reasoning and collaborative instinct and stability under novel pressure and the ability to function within non-human command structures. I thought about the specificity of those criteria. I thought about who would have written them. Sergeant Vaughn, I said, did you write those evaluation criteria? She finished her coffee. Safe travels, analyst Vreth-Solan, she said, which was not an answer but which was, I had come to understand very specifically a human kind of answer. The final thing I want to include in this report, the last observation from Camp Redstone, happened on my last morning there. I was in the observation room packing my data equipment, preparing for departure. The cadets were running their morning perimeter loop below, same as they had on my first day. Gray light, cold air, 23 people left of the original 80 who had enrolled, finishing the cycle. Okafor was in the middle of the pack, not leading it, not at the front, in the middle running at a pace that was not his fastest, because it was not his fastest that mattered right now, keeping his breathing even, watching the pack, watching the terrain, watching the tree line to the north with occasional, casual glances that would look to anyone else like nothing, and that were, I was certain, something. Dax Harrow, who ranked 8th, was running near the front. Lena Briggs, who ranked 5th, was pushing the pace. Bram Costa, who was healthy and fine and running smoothly, was 3 positions behind Finn, and as I watched, he adjusted his stride, slightly, unconsciously, to match Finn's rhythm. 3 others did the same within the next 30 seconds. Not dramatically, not visibly, just settling into the same pace, the same rhythm, without knowing they were doing it, the way a flock moves, the way a tide moves, drawn toward something that is not trying to pull them at all. 23rd out of the original 80 to finish. 14 out of 41 in the final ranking. The last one standing, I wrote at the top of my final report, not because he outlasted them by force, because he made it easier for them to keep going. I am Vreth-Solan, Senior Military Analyst for the Quivaar Dominion, and this is my final assessment from Camp Redstone. The official recommendation is this. Cadet Finn Okafor should be approved for the Joint Exchange Program. His individual performance metrics are satisfactory but not exceptional. His tactical aptitude is genuine and noteworthy. His physical capability is adequate. None of that is why I am recommending him. I am recommending him because of what I observed over 23 days, and because I think the Quivaar Dominion, and frankly any military organization that operates in contested interstellar space, needs to understand something that our frameworks and our ranking systems and our performance metrics are not currently built to measure. The most dangerous individual in any unit is not the strongest, not the fastest, not the highest scoring. Those are measurable things. Measurable things can be planned for. They can be isolated, neutralized, countered. The most dangerous individual is the one who makes everyone around them harder to stop. The one who, without announcement, without drama, without claiming anything, tilts the table, shifts the weight of a group toward function and away from failure. The one who stands still in the middle of an alarm because he has already seen what everyone else has not yet noticed. The one who slows down in the dark so that someone else does not get lost. The one who stands in a cold corridor in his sleeping clothes and asks an intelligence operative the only question that matters, and asks it calmly, and waits for the answer. The Meridian Collective sent 3 surveillance operations to this facility to understand what was being built here. They found him, and they told him he was what they were looking for. I find myself, in my final assessment, in uncomfortable agreement with an intelligence operative I was rooting against. He was not the strongest cadet in this cohort. He was not the fastest, the highest ranked, the most celebrated, the most visible. He was the one in a group of 41 that all the others moved toward when something went wrong, even when they could not explain why. And he was the last one standing, not because he outlasted them, but because none of the others fell while he was near enough to catch them. I am submitting this report with a supplemental attachment, marked priority, and I strongly recommend that Commander Orun Dak read it before the next Frontier Division deployment briefing, and also that he reconsider my next assignment, because I would prefer something with better climate than a frozen northern training camp, and because the coffee here is apparently something you acquire a taste for, and I have now acquired it and I find this deeply inconvenient. Vreth-Solan, Senior Military Analyst, Quivaar Dominion, 3rd Intelligence Division, Camp Redstone Observation, Final Report, submitted and complete.